I hear you've had a very full day, and I've been receiving lots of really positive reports. So yeah, it's good to be with you this evening. And yes, tonight I'm going to be sharing a story with you. We're actually explaining the theme of the retreat. Our theme of the retreat is the myth of the return journey. And the myth of the return journey is a particular story. So I'm going to be sharing that with you this evening. And actually, it really complements the other stories you're going to be hearing this retreat. So we've got a story tomorrow from Jnana Ruchi, I believe, and then from Suryagupta as well. And all three stories come from a text, a really important text called the White Lotus Sutra. And I definitely think they sort of complement, enhance each other. So, so this is the first of the stories. So yes, the White Lotus Sutra, I'll just say a little bit about that first before we get into the story itself, because it really does set the scene for all the three stories we're going to hear on this retreat. And so the White Lotus Sutra is one of the most well-known Buddhist sutras, and it's really gained prominence in East Asia, this particular sutra. So many Buddhist schools, a number of Buddhist schools have this sutra as the sort of prominent text, the main set of teachings, really. And it comes from the Mahayana tradition or phase of Buddhism. Mahayana means the great way. And this phase of Buddhism happened was first recorded, let's say, between the 1st and 2nd century. So it's a very ancient story from a very important phase of Buddhism. And really this phase of Buddhism, and this is why this story is important and the White Lotus Sutra is important, this phase of Buddhism really explored the sort of the fullest aspect of spiritual development. It really says that full enlightenment, full spiritual development practice really is not just about working for one's own individual freedom, one's own individual sort of potential. It's actually working for the benefit of all beings. So that's what the Mahayana sort of phase really explored. It gave a much greater, the great way, it gave a greater sense of what the spiritual life is about. It really shared the vision of what we call the Bodhisattva's path, somebody who is really seeking to alleviate their own suffering and other people's suffering. So it brought out the principle of compassion, enlightenment as wisdom and compassion, and sort of let go of the idea of you're just doing it for yourself. So the White Lotus Sutra is one of Mahayana's most important texts, because it really does explore this aspect, this sort of compassionate aspect, very, very fully. So that's the sutra. And I'm going to actually, the sutra, before I get into the story, the sutra itself has a story all of its own. So it contains all these stories, but it is a story all of its own as well, because it was first apparently expounded by the Buddha as the Buddha was sitting on top of a great mountain peak called Vulture's Peak. And the story says, or the legend says, is that the Buddha was surrounded by thousands upon thousands of followers, disciples, bodhisattvas, advanced spiritual practitioners, deities, all classes of beings were waiting for the Buddha to give a really important teaching. And it said that, he basically announced that he was going to give the very important teaching. In fact, the most important teaching, in fact, a teaching he had yet to give. He said he's taught lots. He's helped many people gain, sort of almost full enlightenment and enlightenment, but actually up until now, he's held back the most advanced teaching. And if you think about that, if you're sitting in this, on this mountaintop and the Buddha's there and he's saying that he's about to give the most advanced teaching. I know when I read this, I was thinking, gosh, this is going to be something. It's because it's already very lofty, the Buddhist teaching. So this is really going to be something. And I imagined actually that it was going to be very complex this teaching. It was going to be very deep, and you have to spend a lot of time working out what it meant. But so I imagine that all these followers are there with bated breath, really. But there are some of his followers, in fact, quite a few, in fact, 5,000 of his followers at that time, when they heard this, when they heard, hang on a minute, you know, what do you mean that we haven't heard everything? What do you mean that there's still more? You know, they took umbrage to that. They got annoyed with that. They will actually, we think we've gained everything already. You know, we are very advanced spiritual beings, and they got up and they left. So that's quite a dramatic beginning. You know, the Buddha said, I'm about to give you the most advanced teachings, and 5,000 of his followers get up and leave. Anyway, the Buddha's not bothered by this at all, of course. He says, yeah, okay, good. In fact, now we're ready. Now I'm ready to give the teachings. So this is quite an important point as well. So almost at that point, before, when all the other followers are there, the audience weren't quite ready. The audience weren't quite ready because some of the audience were feeling like they knew it all already, and there was not much more for them to learn. So when they go, the Buddha recognizes that everybody's ready, everyone's receptive, everybody's open to receiving. And this is where the teachings will have an effect. If there's receptivity, if they're open, if you know there's always more to learn. So I'm there reading this at this point and still thinking, wow, what is this teaching going to be? Now I'm definitely ready for it. And then actually, he tells a very simple story. A very, very simple story is the first teaching. And again, this is interesting, isn't it? Because and all the kind of stories in this White Lotus Sutra, and the ones you're going to hear this retreat, they're all stories, and there's lots of images as well in the White Lotus Sutra. So this advanced teaching that he's been holding back until this time, till everybody was ready, is a set of stories, is a set of images. And that really speaks to the fact that we have this rational mind, we have an intellectual mind, we have a cognitive brain, we know what we think, we know often what our thoughts are, but actually most of us, if you like, is driven by our emotions. We act more for our emotions than our heads often. Than our rational minds. And what myths and stories and images and poetry and music do, they sort of bypass, you know, our rational, logical mind, and they go right to the heart. They go right to the depths. They go right to the unconscious even. So that's why myths and stories are very powerful. And certainly the story I'm going to share with you tonight, I heard it many, many years ago, and it's still a set of images that come to mind often. So in a way, that's why this is a very powerful advanced teaching, as it were, because it bypasses our normal ways of thinking about ourselves and the world. So I'm going to share it with you, and I invite you to, you know, just allow the images to just, you know, settle. Allow to see what arises for you as I'm sharing the story. And at the end, I'll sort of draw out a few themes, but also invite you to just reflect on the story as we're going through the retreat as well. You know, as you're on your walk, in your meditation, just allow it to sort of be there and see what happens. Okay, so here we go. So the story starts with the sort of classic Buddhist words, thus have I heard. Thus have I heard. And in a way, this is when those words were said, it was usually because the Buddha was actually telling the story. But actually, this particular story is not actually told by the Buddha. What happens is he tells that very first simple story. Some of his disciples are overjoyed because they've seen this compassionate principle they've understood that actually this is what was missing in their spiritual life. They were working on their individual freedom, but now they recognize the importance of working for everybody's freedom, and they're overjoyed. And it's actually in response to the Buddha's first story that his disciples share this story. This is their response to hearing the Buddha's, the full vision of enlightenment. And it's called the myth of the return journey. So thus have I heard, or you could say once upon a time, of course, or once there was. So let's do once there was. Once there was a father and a son, and the father and son were traveling together. And then one day, we don't know when, we don't know how, but one day they became separated. And they basically went in completely different directions. The father, basically, he went off, and we don't know how long they were separated for. It says they might have been separated for 10 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, even 50 years, which is interesting. So we don't know how long they're separated for, but they basically go off in different directions. And the father ended up traveling and going from place to place and building his business and actually doing quite well in his business. And he eventually settles in a particular place, and his business really grows exponentially from then. He becomes a very rich, very wealthy man. And it's so rich, and the descriptions are very lush, actually, in the sutra. You know, he has his mansions, and every sort of room in the mansion, and everywhere he sits, everywhere he lies is beautiful. You can imagine him sitting on these thrones and being fanned, of course, by, you know, lots of people. And even the canopies he sits under, and the fans that he's fanned by, they're even embossed and entwined with gold and crystals and jewels of all shapes and all colors and all sizes. So very, very rich and decorative. And his garden has beautiful gardens, of course. His food is beautifully laid out, it's healthy, it's nutritious, it's you know, it's just delicious food. Every aspect of his life, every aspect of the way he functions is beautiful and aesthetic and golden. You can imagine his clothes and everything just being golden, and there being light around him. And yeah, so that's how he lives, and he's very happy in many ways. He's very, very content. He has good relationships. He conducts his business well. He's obviously well regarded. Everything is going really well. He's deeply fulfilled, apart from, or the big but, as it were, apart from the fact that he is missing his son. He longs to see his son. He worries about his son. He doesn't know what happened to his son. And that is a great sort of sadness for the father. So that's the father. So what happened to the son? So the son, he's gone in another direction, of course. And the son, basically completely different to the father. He basically is struggling. He doesn't know how he's gotten lost. He basically forgets everything and just tries to survive. And as he's trying to survive, he's looking for food, he's looking for shelter. He is wandering from place to place. And sometimes he finds himself, you know, sort of in the same place, going around and around, in effect, in sort of circles. And then he gets sick of that space, that place, and then wants to go off in a completely direction. And then sometimes finds himself back to the same space. So really frustrating. So he's lost, he's confused, he's fearful, he just wants to find a way to survive. And one day he finds himself, as he's gone off in another direction again, he finds himself at his father's kingdom. And he wanders into this kingdom, and he sees this huge crowd. And this crowd, it's a huge crowd, and he sees there's a person in the middle of this crowd on this throne. And he's fascinated by this crowd, of course. He sort of moves towards it. He wants to see what all the fuss is about. And then he sees, yes, everybody's very well dressed, and there are people bowing to the person on the throne. There are people giving documents and seals. It's obviously some kind of business going on there, but there's real joy and rejoicing as well. And he's sort of just magnetically drawn, if you like, to this crowd. except he then stops, because he realizes, he looks at himself and he looks at the crowd, and he realizes if he goes any further, he's probably going to get into trouble, because he is disheveled. He is probably, you know, smelly. He's basically realizes that if he goes any further, then he'll either get, you know, sort of shooed away or rejected by the crowd, or they'll capture him and throw him into prison, or they'll ask him to be, you know, they're going to get him to be an army recruit or something like that. So he realizes he shouldn't go any further than he already has, and he actually starts backing away from this great crowd. And then before he does that, his father looks up, of course. His father looks up and he sees his son. And I imagine that he just, you know, almost wanted to cry with relief. There he is. He didn't care about what his son looked like. He knew it was his son. And he quickly sends a messenger and says to the messenger, go and get that man. So the messenger does this. But of course, the son is already trying to back away. He sees his man running towards him. He starts to flee. He gets terrified, and apparently he faints, in fact, out of complete fear. So this is not obviously what the father expected to happen. And he realizes that, you know, that's the wrong tack, as it were. So he sends another messenger and says to the messenger, look, let the man know that he's free to go. He's free to go, that, you know, that's fine. So that's, and this is really important, because you know, the father sort of recognizes that his son really isn't ready to kind of really connect with him directly. So he basically, you know, realizes he needs to do what we call skillful means, what we call in Buddhism skillful means, which is really where he thinks, what's going to work? What's going to work in, what's going to help my son make this journey back to him? What's going to work? What's going to be the most supportive, kind, but effective thing to do at this moment in time? So that's what happens. He basically finds another couple of messengers and says, look, that man that's going freely off there. And he finds two particular messengers, actually. They're also a bit disheveled. You know, they're dressed in very dark clothes as well. And he says, look, can you go and make friends with that person and really get them to work with me, work for you, in fact, but it's really for me. So that's what happens. They go off and they say to the man, look, you know, it's tough out here, isn't it? It's really hard life, having to make a living, you know, but we're lucky because we got some really good work. It's actually back there in the kingdom, and it's right near the mansion, but don't worry, it's clearing a pile of dirt. And that sounds good to the son. He's like, yes, you can do that. So he goes with them, and they basically you know, sort of start him off clearing this huge pile of dirt, which is right near where the father is. So the father's able to see his son all the time. He watches him. He knows he can't go near him, but he watches him. And he's getting lots of money to do this work. But he is living in what they call a hovel, right next to the mansion, where there's not much light, there's no amenities or anything like that. But that's what he's used to. So he stays in this sort of a shelter and clears away the dirt. And eventually, the father does go and speaks to his son. And he dons dark clothes, sort of shabby clothes, if you like. And he just says to him, this is maybe after a year, 2 years, 3 years, he goes and says, you're doing such a great job. I really appreciate it. In fact, let me help you. And he gets a shovel and he starts sort of helping the son. And the son's at first quite wary, doesn't make much eye contact with him, but eventually, you know, they start chatting. And a few years pass, and next thing, the father says, goes to the son and says, look, you're doing such a brilliant job. I really enjoy our chats as well. Hey, why don't you do some errands for me as well? I've got a few errands you could be making for me. In fact, why don't you just, you're like a son to me, really. Just see me as a father. Anything you want, anything you need, let me know. So eventually the son moves from shifting the dirt to doing errands for the father. And then a few years passed, 1, 2, 3 years passed. And then the father again says, you're doing a brilliant job with the errands. Now the son is going in and out of the mansion. And he's really getting used to life alongside his father. So this time the father says, you know what, I could do a bit more help on my business. Why don't you just help me with my accounts? So next thing, the son is really dealing with all this money. He's beginning to touch money. He's beginning to get a sense of what the father does for work. And he begins to enjoy it as well. It's probably around this time that the son begins to have a sense of, a sort of sense of he's looking back at his life. He's already getting uncomfortable in his, what they call the hovel, the shelter that he's in. He wants more space. He wants more light. And he looks back and he remembers how desperate he was for food, how desperate he would be for shelter, how alone he was. And he feels great sort of sadness really for himself. A few years go by, and this time the father says, look, I want you just to take over, run my business for me, please. Just run it. I trust you implicitly. You're like a son to me. Just run it for me. So again, he's now got the full responsibility, and he's a trusted member. Finally, the father becomes ill, and he takes to his bed. And the father knows now that he really does have to tell the son who he really is. All this time, the son still hasn't recognized his father, but his father knows who he is, and it's now time to tell him. So he calls actually all his entourage, all the local dignitaries, or anyone that matters in all the neighboring areas and his area. And they know that he's on his deathbed effectively. And then he finally calls the son, and he brings the son right to the foreground and tells him, I am your father, and these are your riches. And the son is overjoyed. The son suddenly recognizes a connection between him and his father. He's overjoyed, and he does inherit his legacy, his birthright. So that's the story of the return journey. And so we're going to draw out a few themes now from the story. And first thing to say is it's a deeply symbolic story. And it might even, as you were listening to it, it might even be familiar to you in some way. So as I'm sharing some of these themes, you can be thinking about, well, what does it speak to you? What does it already say to you? So the first thing, it is a deeply symbolic story, which means that everything in the story represents something. Is not to be taken literally. So although it's talking about money and success and things like that, it's not literal. In fact, the sort of money and the jewels and all that splendor, in the story represents spiritual richness. The father in the story is the Buddha, is the enlightened being, is an awakened person. Buddha just means an awakened being, somebody who's woken up from ignorance. And in a way, that's what the father represents. And the fact that he's got this mansion and all this wealth and everything he does is with all this beauty and splendor, really that's evoking the spiritual qualities of the enlightened mind, qualities such as generosity and courage and fearlessness and joy and gratitude. These are all qualities of the enlightened mind. One of the things I found interesting in the story was that the father's really engaging a lot of activity, a lot of business, and then eventually he seems to do less and less. But his wealth continues to grow. It continues to compound to be exponential growth. And I think this points to the fact that it is said that in the enlightened sort of consciousness, well, sometimes I think we think of enlightenment as sort of a static thing. You're either unenlightened or you're enlightened. And if you're enlightened, it's a sort of fixed state. And actually what this really says is that enlightenment is a dynamic experience. It's the qualities of enlightenment, such as generosity or fearlessness or energy or clarity, they continue to grow. They continue to deepen, they continue to find different ways of expressing themselves. So it's a very dynamic experience, apparently, being enlightened. So this is one thing, that's why there's ongoing growth that happens in the story. So the other thing is, so we've got the father and the riches, what they represent. And then you've got the son. So who is the son? The father is the Buddha, the enlightened being. Who is the son? Well, you've probably worked it out already. The son is us. The son is me. The son is you. The son is the unenlightened person. The son is the person, all of us really, who's searching, wondering, where to find happiness. And of course, they've put the son in a very, he's disheveled. He's in a very difficult circumstances, and what that signifies is suffering. So although we might not relate to the son in the way that he's depicted, but we do suffer. We are confused often. We are lost. We often don't know which direction to go in, and often we find ourselves coming back to the same situation again and again, and thinking, how have I got here, and where do I go next? So these are very familiar sort of experiences, I think. So that's the son, and really what we need to do is so we've got the father, we've got the son, and certainly for me, when I came across both those characters in the story, I really connected to both of them. Actually, there was something in me that really resonated with the kind of potential, the Buddha as potential, as my potential. And I really thought, yes, I really feel that on some level, I can be kinder, I can be courageous, I can be clearer. I really wanted those things. I was drawn to those things. I also was very drawn to what it might be to live a Buddhist life as well. I could see that there was a lot of beauty in living a Buddhist life. I could see there was a lot of friendliness, friendship, deep friendship. I could see there was a kind of simplicity in living a Buddhist life, a sort of ethical simplicity, a sort of being free of having one's conscience clear, and that actually being a really positive state of being. So I was very drawn to that. At the same time, so I resonated with the Buddha. At the same time, I also very much connected to the son. I had real empathy actually for the son, because I recognized that. I recognized the conditions he was in a sense. I grew up in a very poor area in London, quite a hostile environment as well. There's lots of racism and things. So I also was searching and not knowing where happiness would be found, and not being comfortable really in my setting, in my environment. So I really resonated with that. And I also resonated with just having lots of up and down emotions, sort of having negative moods and being moody and having and making mistakes and being upset and upsetting people and being upset by others. That all of that goes on in one's life, I really sort of thought that's what the son's experience is in many ways. So I really resonated with that. And this idea of the dirt, and the sort of shifting the dirt. Well, there's definitely been times. How I relate to that and what that symbolizes for me is the fact that one has to face at times one's own negativity. One has to face sometimes one's own unskillfulness, the difficult things, the challenges in one's life. And it's not easy. And it's hard work to kind of face that. But he's shifting the dirt. All of that is happening alongside this mansion. So I really appreciated the way the father related to the son. You know, he really saw the son, he saw what he needed, he saw what's appropriate for him then, and he was very patiently getting to know the son, very patiently and lovingly relating to him. So I was really touched by that, and it really evoked for me, I remember what some of my first early conversations with Buddhist order members, and I remember I was having a tough time on retreat, dealing with some things. I can't remember what it was now, but I remember thinking, right, I'm going to talk to an order member about what I was going through. And something I was embarrassed about, I think, something maybe unskillful that I was embarrassed about, or that I just didn't want to do anymore. And I really, really wasn't sure if I should tell her. I was thinking, if I tell her this, she might not like me anymore. She might think I'm not a very good Buddhist. I'm not up for being a Buddhist. She might reject me even. But I did, you know, sort of take courage, and I did share whatever it was that was going on with me. And she really listened. She really, she listened very sort of empathically and kindly. She was able to reflect back what I was saying. So I really knew she understood what I was sharing. And somehow or other, in the course of this conversation, I just felt whatever I'd done in the past and whatever I was going through was okay. I didn't feel she judged me. In fact, what she did, I remember, was that she shared some of her challenges that she had as well. And I just thought, oh, you've had similar experiences to me. And it was really great, because I thought, oh, it's not just me then that has to deal with this stuff. She's dealt with it too. And look at her. You know, I sort of thought she was incredibly impressive. She was leading this retreat. You know, I thought her life was sorted, really. But when she shared, oh, I've gone through that. I've dealt with things like this. This is what happened with me. I thought, oh, it's normal actually to go through suffering. It's normal to, you know, make mistakes. It's normal to have things come up in meditation that it can be challenging. And it really helped. And I remember that conversation because we ended it laughing loads, and it felt like a whole weight had gone off my shoulders. And I felt that I was fundamentally okay. I was fundamentally worthy of practice, worthy of growth, worthy of freeing myself from suffering. And I was fundamentally able to fulfill my potential. So it was a very important conversation. And in a way, what happened in that is that I realized that with friendship and with shared values, well, she didn't reject me, and I wasn't rejecting myself mostly. That was the thing. I realized I didn't have to reject myself. So that's what happens. That's what you see in this story with a father and son relationship. The way that, you know, the father is relating very patiently with the son. And through that, the son grows in confidence, and he's accepting himself more and more as well. So last point I'm going to make. So yes, we get to the sort of crux of the story, really, because you've got the father and son. They were separated at the beginning of the story. And so what is the return journey? The return journey is the son coming back into relationship with his father in the story, but into relationship with his potential, into a relationship with his potential to be enlightened. You've got him returning to his innate qualities, as it were, innate qualities of love, of wisdom, opening up to all the richness of the enlightened mind and enlightened consciousness and growth. That's what you've got in the story, the son returning to that and recognizing himself and recognizing his true potential. So in a way, that's where we are. We're on this journey, we're searching, and part of practice, as well as working with only challenges, part of practice is getting more and more familiar, more and more comfortable with positive qualities, with our potential for enlightenment, with our potential for growth, getting more and more familiar with that, being less frightened of it, and keeping on going on that journey till ultimately we become whole beings, fully aware, fully free, fully loving beings. Thank you.